Welcome to Glass in Session. I'm your host, Val, and I thank you for clicking play, for subscribing, and supporting this show. I hope you enjoyed the last episode that took us to the varied vineyards of Lebanon. This week, we are headed to Central Europe to sample the vineyard offerings of Europe's fifth largest country, Poland. 1,000 years of... Wait, Poland makes wine? Yes, they do. I'm not going to physically sample it today. Well, the wine. I could physically sample the vodka because I haven't seen the wine on the shelves. But vodka, yes, I can get. Maybe an occasional beer, but no wine. But we've already covered vodka in another episode. So I'm going to talk about the wine anyway. Then I'll be prepared if I encounter some of Poland's fine juice. Plus, I've already hit up some of their neighbors like the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Ukraine, Hungary, even a little bit of German Sekt, which makes an appearance in this episode. It's clearly in an important area of the world right now. Tak, yes? Which brings us to geography. If you've ever trolled my show notes, you've seen that I'm a fan of worldatlas.com and Britannica to get my bearings, check facts, etc., especially if it's a country I've not been to or don't know a lot about. So as I gaze upon this colorful, very busy map, let me take you on a quick tour. You want to start with the shoreline, right? The water's edge, the Baltic Sea, rides Poland's northern border from Germany in the west to the Gulf of Gdansk, where we run smack into this Russian enclave, believe it or not, of Kaliningrad, taking up about a third of Poland's northeastern border. As we move clockwise from the Baltic Sea to Kaliningrad, we round the northeastern corner of this rectangular-ish country, which borders a sliver of Lithuania. Dropping down the eastern border, we encounter Belarus and Ukraine. And rounding the southeastern corner of Poland, we encounter the Carpathian Mountains, the Tatra Range, and Slovakia's border. Then we head west to the Czech Republic. Rounding our final corner, the southwestern border of Poland and the Sudetic Mountains, we are once again at Poland's western border of Germany. 7 countries on Poland's borders. Now, outside of the southern mountain ranges that I just mentioned, most of Poland is kind of flat, lowlands, hills, and some river valleys, and they are considered kind of the confluence of Eastern and Western European geography as well as culture. So sure, they were invaded early and often from both the east and the west. They even have a desert in southern Poland before you reach the Carpathians. It's only about 12 square miles, but it is one of Europe's 5 natural deserts. Probably not a good place for vines, huh? But all in all, there are about 38 million people living here on nearly 312 square kilometers, or for the Americans who never switched to metric like we were promised in second grade in 1974, nearly 121 square miles of land. So how about we hit up a bit of history? As I alluded to in the beginning, we can trace Polish winemaking all the way back to 966 CE. Yes, roughly when most of Europe was still kind of figuring out swords and all that good stuff. But we can once again thank some of the monks of the Benedictine and the Cistercian flavors for getting the party started. They were in charge of production and, one assumes, drank most of what they crushed. Although by the 14th century, the nobility and aristocracy, or burghers, caught on, they started digging the wine and even started planting vineyards and making wine far and wide. Early whites leaned on the German variety from next door, Riesling, Pinot Gris, and the Veltliner, but not so much red wine. Just a few examples from some Austrian red varieties. I've also mentioned the Little Ice Age before, as it was a thing that had far-reaching effects in countries around the world for literally centuries. And although it began in the 1300s, the part that hit Europe particularly hard occurred around mid-16th century, tanking temperatures and sunshine hours. Many of you know that climate, weather, sunshine, these are all things that impact grape growing and wine styles. So Poland pivoted to imported wines from places like Hungary, as well as France and Italy, who were very well established in their wine growing or grape growing and winemaking at this time. They also started producing other categories such as vodka, beer, and fruit wines, meaning wine from every other fruit that's not a grape. This was the beginning of the downslide to wars, a phylloxera invasion, shifting borders, occupations, and post-World War II communism, dun dun dun, which we've talked about before in this podcast as another reason why the wine world can't have nice things. Post-World War II, communism killed off the remaining vineyards, and the last one closed in the mid-70s. All that was left was cheap berry and apple wine. And if you're into that, that's fine, but that's not what this is about. The wines imported in the 80s and 90s were from Bulgaria and Hungary, and I've done episodes on both of those as well. And I've linked them up as well as all of Poland's neighbors that I have covered to this point. But the wine imported, as what happens with a lot of imports, we don't always get the best examples. But it was during this time that the winds of change started blowing. Roman Myśliwiec, often considered modern Polish winemaking's daddy, he founded the Goles vineyard in Podkarpacie in 1982, and that was the first winery of the modern winemaking era, thus sparking a slow burn revival. So this would have been kind of the second wave, if you will, of Polish wine trying to get its groove. He brought cuttings from southeast Poland that were comprised of vines from Hungary, Czechoslovakia. That's what it was at the time. It's now split into the two successor states of the Czech Republic and Slovakia, which I've talked about in other episodes, and the Ukraine. That's what we called it back then. That's how I learned it. But it's Ukraine now. And with all these cuttings, he also established a vine nursery of climate-appropriate varieties and even kicked off with some hybrids. More vineyards started opening from the mid-'80s through the early aughts. Poland joined the EU in 2004, so as borders opened, well-traveled Poles came home from stints in European wineries, and as what happens with many wine regions around Europe, they bring with them the figurative seeds of a true wine culture that would grow into the 500-plus vineyards and growing that Poland has today. Significant to the growth and expansion includes the elimination of a law that prohibited small wineries or homegrown vineyard owners from selling their wines, as well as the establishment of growers' associations, conventions, and competitions around Europe. And this was around 2000. I'm trying to think if it was 2008 or 9, but it was around that time. And after that, that's when we kind of see the third wave of development of the Polish wine industry. This is going to bring us to the wine regions. While there aren't any official appellations as of this recording, there is a region in the process of being recognized as such, so more to follow on that. In southern and western Poland, this is where we find most of the vines. However, grapes are now being grown as far north as the lakes of Missouri, not Missouri, Missouri, or it looks like Masuria, almost to the Lithuanian border, at the same latitude as the far north of England. So while the country wasn't really making wine through most of the Cold War, we can look to climate change as a factor in opening up the floodgates to more favorable grape-growing regions. Now, the EU does classify Poland's viticulture region as Zone A, which is where we find those such as Great Britain, Belgium, and most of Germany, most of the Czech Republic. This is a classification system based on growing degree days or heat accumulation. This influences everything from winemaking rules, yields, labeling, and all that good stuff. And speaking of climate, for you academic journal lovers out there, I found a paper in the International Journal of Climate Change Strategies and Management that studied climate change's effects on wine production in Poland. I did. It concluded, and this is my very, very broad summary because this is a podcast, that climate change could give Poland the potential to be what they refer to as the center of gravity of wine production in Europe. Now, there are, of course, other factors in play and further research needs to be conducted, but it's worth a read if you're rooting for Poland or if you really just want to geek out on peer-reviewed journal goodness because you know I linked it up. God, I miss grad school. Anyway, you see where all this geography, regions, grape varieties, climate change-related discourse comes into play when we are talking about wine styles, market, and all that good stuff. Exciting, right? And we have to note, what the little ice age killeth, climate change bringeth back. And bam, so we're here at the regions themselves. We're going to start in the west with Lubuskie. And here we have Zielona Góra, Zielona Góra and its surroundings, which are claiming the largest concentrations of vineyards and wine producers in Poland, with a winemaking tradition stretching back over 850 years. This is the OG, or Poland's wine heartland, so don't sleep on it. As we can also trace a very strong Sekt, or sparkling wine industry here, since this was actually once part of Germany, at least until World War II. What that does tell us about the grapes, of course, are the cooler climate Rieslings, the Traminer, and of course with the sparkling wine, we've got the Pinots Noir, Gris, Blanc, and all that good stuff. Moving further south into Lower Silesia and surrounding Wrocław, I hope I said that right, we find varied soils and slopes where producers are creating classic method sparkling wines as well as pet nats, and I did a whole episode on that. Some claim this to be the ultimate terroir, although we can find some decent juice made in Upper Silesia as well. Pinot Noir and Chardonnay do grow well in this area. Moving on to Lesser Poland, Małopolska, and the Vistula River Valley in the Carpathian Mountains. This is more central and south of Warsaw. It has well-established wine tourism, it has wine routes, it even has an annual international wine festival, and is considered the warmest place in Poland, apparently. Yet wines here are made with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are killing it. And then we have Subcarpathia or Podkarpackie, which I've already mentioned. This is in Poland's southeastern corner, and it was the first out of the gate in terms of commercial viticultural development. Remember where Roman planted his cuttings. Sure, the climate here is, shall we say, sporty, which translates to colder climate and higher altitudes, bringing that acidity and zing to the party. I like a scrappy region steeped in history, including showing off what hybrid grapes can do. There are others up and coming, such as the Upper Silesia, which I just mentioned, Western Pomerania near the Baltic. But since this is my first dip into the pool of Polish wine at all, I'm going to avoid the deep end at this point. This is going to bring me to the grapes. According to Vino, there are over 70 varieties of grapes grown here in Poland. And as I mentioned, as far as the Vitis vinifera grape varieties go, Chardonnay, it's up there, but Riesling, as of 2023, when her article was written, that was considered the most planted of the Vitis vinifera varieties. Muscat, mostly Muscat Autumnal, is doing well here, and I linked up an episode where I talked about the different muscats, of which there are hundreds, by the way, but this is actually one of the varieties that you will find in the cooler climates. And just as the cooler regions in Europe are playing with hybrids, Poland has been doing this for decades, and they're mastering this with Solaris leading the charge as it is planted nearly everywhere here. And you might be thinking, where have I heard about Solaris before? Is this one of those peewee grapes, Val, that you talked about in the Belgian wine episode? Why, yes, it is. And as a refresher, here's the Cork Dork alert from that session. Peewee, yes, I said peewee, P-I-W-I. It comes from the German word, and you will excuse this because I forevowed most of this as best as I could, Pilzwiderstandfähig. This means fungus resistance. In French, the word is interspécifique. Either way, these varieties were developed especially to survive the wet nasties in the late 1800s after many bouts of mildew, phylloxera, and other plagues just literally had their way with French vines back then. However, France kind of threw in the towel on their research in 1935 and then stuck with their traditional appellation development with their original varieties. But during World War II, when Germany was occupying France, well, they also scooped up the surviving hybrids that I mentioned earlier, and they took them back to Germany to pick up where the French left off. It was only in the late 1990s when parties interested in working toward grapes that would resist fungus under the leadership of Dr. Pierre Basler, they formed this international working group. The acronym itself, Peewee or P-I-W-I, did not really appear until the end of 2000. Peewee International was formed, and the term was trademarked only 9 years ago, 80 years after the original French research was abandoned. This is now an international effort, and in this big effort, you're going to see more and more articles about these grapes. You can just put in PIWI, you're going to see a whole bunch of research papers and things on these grapes. But they have a complete now Peewee International organization and, oh hey, a summit as well as wine tasting competitions. There are conferences around the world featuring an international slate of lecturers, news about countries like very recently Sweden using these grapes, including Solaris. And this is all on the Peewee International website, which I linked up for you. So I mentioned the Peewee grapes, I mentioned a lot of white grapes, but they do grow reds here too. I already mentioned Pinot Noir. But Cabernet and Merlot are planted here, particularly in Le Bousquier for lush reds and some rosé styles in Lesser Poland. The reds to know, if you're looking for a bottle of something that is uniquely Polish, is a blend of Regent, Rondo, and Cabernet Cortis. They dominate the red hybrids. When these three are blended together, I guess it's called the Polish blend, and that to me sounds like a fun one to try. And the emerging trends with respect to styles, well, we have the sweet wines. Sparkling wines are a hit here, both traditional method and the pet nats, as I mentioned, as well as styles of reds, dry whites, sweet whites, rosés are produced here. But we're also seeing a trend toward the orange amber wines, the ones made with the white varieties macerated on skins. I did talk about those in an entire episode, as well as those aged in amphorae. Moving on to what I could gather from Poland's current place in the wine world. Today they produce over 2 million bottles annually. All of the administrative districts, which I will now recite for you from north to south. No, I won't, and you know I won't. Well, they all produce wine. It's certainly a country to watch, as according to a Falstaff article I linked up for you to geek out on. Poland's wine market is growing by 10 to 15% annually and now starting to overtake Belgium and Finland. Okay, sounds like we need to probably do an episode on the wines of Finland, because didn't know about that. And I look forward to seeing where Polish wine goes and how it comes into its own in terms of culture. It's already got a rich history, and it's already got some unique things about it, especially with what they're doing with the hybrids and the peewee grapes and their native blends there. Poland has been in the news a little bit lately, too, which I thought was a bit serendipitous. I was listening to a podcast the other day with one of our retired Army generals. He was talking a lot about what's going on with the Americans who are stationed in Poland and all that. While wine is making its comeback, its position on the political map in terms of the Russians in Kaliningrad and the American troops in and out, hokey pokey, whatever's going on there, as well as Poland's record spending on defense, Poland is simultaneously investing in vineyards and missile defense systems, which tells you something about the moment we're in. That said, I'm going to give you a quick fact check. Although I said Poland was investing in vineyards, and Polish farmers are beneficiaries of some EU subsidies, unlike some of its neighbors, the government doesn't fork out directly to vintners. So this is one of those countries where the government did not subsidize the wine industry. But still, since Poland is on the geopolitical radar for some of us, and geopolitics are making most of us drink, tariffs be damned, Poland should certainly be on your wine radar. And with that, na zdrowie. Cheers. I am honored that you chose, of all the other wine podcasts out there, mine this week. Thank you for sharing these batshit crazy times with me in your ears and for subscribing, which keeps that precious spot open for me in your podcast feed. I really am humbled by that because I know my podcast feed has over 100 different podcasts in it, and it is hard to listen to all the stuff you want to listen to and learn, but I appreciate you keeping a spot open for me. Now, if you're here in the States and you can get your hands on some Polish wine, I would love to hear from you. You can email me at val@glassandsession or at glassandsession@proton.me. On the socials, hey, pick your poison. Blue Sky, Glass and Session, Vino With Val on Threads and Instagram. You'll see Glass and Session, trademarked, in my bio. I'm on Spoutable, sometimes as Glass and Session. I'm on Substack now, glassandsession.substack.com. I'm Vino With Val on Pinterest and on Facebook /Glass and Session when they're not kicking me off. Connect with me on LinkedIn. They haven't kicked me off yet. Valerie Caruso, DWS, CWE, FWS, letters, wine stuff, and guess what? Audiobook narrator, which reminds me you can find this podcast and all the audiobooks I've narrated on Audible. I've linked up my latest by Pacific Northwest wine and spirits writer Becky Garrison. It's not about wine, but she does talk about it in the book, so of course I thought I could mention it here. And you can always email me or DM me on the socials if you want a free review copy. So yes, I can totally give you a promo code for that book or any of the books I've narrated on Winston Churchill, on the Gurkhas, or the Russian spies. I've done books on those things too. So you can always reach out to me if you want a free review copy. I can send you a code for that. That is if you're in the United States or the UK. Just a little disclaimer there. Now, there is always Glass and Session swag and podcast swag available in my TeePublic store linked way at the bottom of the show notes and on my website. I thank those of you who are supporting the show with my silly merch. Glass and Session is a production and registered trademark of Vino With Val, LLC. Music is Write Your Story by Joystock. Website is glassandsession.com/podcast.